Hi, my name is Emily Graves. I'm 36 years old, a mother, a daughter, a woman who once believed that love, if given enough time and sacrifice, could change someone. I don't believe that anymore. Not after what I heard through that door. Not after the words that came from the one person I had destroyed my life to protect. People look at me and they see someone strong. Someone reliable, someone who steps in when things fall apart, but they don't know what it's like to stay when no one else will. They don't know what it's like to lose everything because you chose loyalty over logic. I live just outside Nashville, Tennessee, in a small rented house that smells like cedar and sadness. My studio is half a kitchen table and a second-hand laptop. My son Jackson shares a room with me now. He's 9 years old, wise beyond his years, quiet in a way that breaks my heart. He used to draw dragons. Now he draws silence. This isn't how I thought my life would turn out. But everything changed 3 years ago when I took in my father, David Graves, a decorated Marine Corps veteran turned battlefield of a man. PTSD didn't just steal his peace, it stole his identity. The man who once lifted me onto his shoulders and called me my fierce little fighter was now a shell of who he used to be. He flinched at sudden sounds. He screamed in his sleep. He forgot birthdays. He broke windows during flashbacks he didn't remember. When my mother left him, no one blamed her, least of all me. But someone had to step in, and so I did. I brought him into our home, told my husband, Matt, that we'd figure it out together, that it was just temporary. Matt stared at me like I'd gone mad. "You can't fix him, Em." But I thought I could try, because this was my dad, and I believed, no, I needed to believe that he would get better, that with enough love he would come back to us. What followed was the slow erosion of my marriage. Matt grew distant, tired, bitter. Jackson started sleeping with a nightlight again. And I became a full-time caregiver, part-time mother, and an invisible wife. Still, I held on. I took Dad to his VA appointments. I researched every treatment, read every article, joined support groups. I kept a journal of his moods, his medications, his triggers. I documented everything, but nothing prepared me for the night he mistook Jackson for a threat. My son had only walked into the living room to grab his stuffed dinosaur. Dad had woken from a flashback and grabbed him, shouting something about insurgents and needing backup. Jackson didn't scream. He just froze. So did I. Matt lost it. Said it was him or my father. Said we couldn't raise a child in a war zone. And that was the night I lost my husband. The night he packed his things and took Jackson to his mother's for a few weeks. Those few weeks turned into a custody battle, into tears in courtrooms, into Jackson asking me why he had to go. But I stayed with Dad, even as he unraveled, even as he forgot who I was on his bad days. Even as he shattered a coffee mug and called me a manipulative nurse from his unit and shoved me into a wall. Even when the bruises formed. Even then, I stayed. Because I thought that somewhere beneath the trauma, beneath the night sweats and the paranoia, was the man who once taught me how to bait a hook and said I'd be a warrior. But then came that night. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because the rain had come in sideways, hitting the windows like fists. I had just gotten home from a grocery run and passed by his door on my way to the kitchen. The door wasn't fully shut. And maybe I shouldn't have paused. Maybe I should have just kept walking. But I heard his voice, soft, sincere, almost joyful. I hadn't heard him speak like that in years. He was on the phone, and then he said it. "Chloe, I've updated the will. The house in East Ridge, the account from the Marines, all of it. It's yours. I trust you to honor the family name." I stopped breathing. Chloe, my sister, the one who sent birthday cards with glitter and photos from her vacation in Italy. The one who posted selfies with Dad once a year and called it quality time. The one who told me I was crazy for letting him live with me. That Chloe. My hands were trembling. I felt the grocery bag slip from my grip. The oranges rolled across the floor like mocking marbles. That house? The one he was giving her? I paid the property taxes on it. That account? The one with his veteran savings? I helped him file the benefits paperwork when he couldn't remember his own Social Security number. And yet, she was the one he trusted. Not me. Not the one who spoon-fed him soup when he forgot how to hold a bowl. Not the one who held him as he cried for soldiers who never made it home. Not the one who gave up everything. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. He laughed on the phone with her, soft and warm, like a dad, my dad. That's when it hit me. He never saw me as a daughter anymore. I was a nurse, a burden bearer, a ghost in the hallway. And she, Chloe, she was his legacy. That night, after he went to sleep, I sat in my car with the rain beating down like applause, and I screamed. I screamed for every night I stayed up monitoring his breathing. I screamed for every text Chloe ignored when I begged for help. I screamed for the daughter I used to be, the one who thought that love could earn loyalty. I don't know how long I sat there, but I know this. Something inside me died that night. And something else? It started to rise. Not anger, not revenge, clarity. And once it arrived, I knew there was no going back, because he had chosen her. Now it was time for me to choose me. Have you ever sacrificed everything only to be cast aside like you were nothing? If this story echoes even a small part of your own, hit like, drop a comment, or share this with someone who needs to hear it, because what comes next will break your heart, and maybe rebuild it too. The morning after I heard Dad's betrayal, the sky outside was a flat, uncaring gray. No birdsong, no golden light streaming through the windows, just silence and the weight of too many years spent sacrificing for someone who never even saw me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my bedroom wrapped in an old quilt, the one Mom made before she left, my eyes fixed on nothing, my heart pounding like I'd run for miles. But I hadn't moved. I hadn't even cried. I didn't know how. You see, when you spend enough time pushing your emotions down, hiding them behind a calm voice and a busy schedule, they begin to die off. Slowly, quietly, like frost creeping over a flower bed. By morning, I was just numb. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. My hair was stringy, pulled back in a knot that hadn't been washed in days. My eyes were red, sunken, and shadowed by exhaustion. My skin had taken on that sallow tone of someone who lived off coffee and leftover soup. There were creases between my brows that hadn't been there 3 years ago. 3 years. It had been 3 years since I moved Dad into our home. 3 years since I started losing myself piece by piece. Matt used to call me Sunshine. He said when I laughed, it lit up a room. That girl was gone. She had drowned somewhere between night terrors and panic attacks and cleaning up shattered dishes at 2 a.m. I pulled Jackson's hoodie over my shoulders and crept downstairs. Dad was still asleep on the couch, the TV still glowing with some late-night rerun of a war documentary. Of course. He always claimed he didn't remember watching those shows, but deep down, I think he did it to feel something. Anything. To feel like he was still a soldier, still important, still needed. I stood over him, clutching the hoodie tight. His breathing was shallow, his mouth half open. He looked old, smaller than I remembered, frail even, like the war had whittled him down to bones and guilt, and I hated myself for still loving him. That was the part no one ever talks about. When someone you love hurts you, not just once, not in some catastrophic way, but over and over in 100 small betrayals, you don't stop loving them. You just stop recognizing who you are when you're around them. "Mom?" Jackson's voice startled me. He was standing in the hallway, his hair messy, his eyes half closed, clutching the dinosaur plushie he hadn't let go of since that night months ago. "Hey, baby," I whispered, crossing to him and kneeling down. "You okay?" He nodded, but looked past me toward the couch. "Is Grandpa still sick?" I hesitated. He wasn't coughing. He didn't have the flu. But he was sick, in a way that stole everything from him and everything from us. "Yeah," I said softly. "He is." Jackson nodded slowly, then reached up and touched my cheek. "You don't smile anymore." That did it. The tears finally came. Not the sobbing, theatrical kind, just silent, trembling rivers down my face as I held my son close and buried my face in his shoulder. I didn't smile anymore. I didn't live anymore. I just survived. That morning, after dropping Jackson off at school, I sat in my car for nearly 45 minutes, parked outside a gas station, wondering if I even had the energy to go home. I hated my house. I hated the silence, the smells, the way everything reminded me of what I'd lost. I hated the way it no longer felt like mine. The house used to be filled with laughter, with the aroma of Matt's awful experiments in the kitchen, with Jackson's footsteps stomping up and down the stairs. Now, it was just a battlefield, one I had volunteered for. I finally drove home and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the list of bills on my phone. I had a handful of overdue freelance invoices, 3 clients ghosting me, and barely enough in my account to cover groceries and Jackson's school lunch for the week. But Chloe? She was planning a trip to Aspen. I saw it on her Instagram story the night before. Designer coat, pink martini, that fake laugh she did for the camera. She hadn't texted me in months. But somehow, she was the one Dad trusted. She was the one getting the house and the pension. I didn't know what made me do it, but I called her. The phone rang 4 times, and then she answered. "Em?" Her voice was light, casual, like nothing was wrong. I didn't say hello. I didn't ask how she was. I said, "I heard Dad last night. I know he's leaving everything to you." There was a pause. A long one. Then, "Oh, you weren't supposed to hear that." My stomach dropped. "That's all you have to say?" "I mean," she sighed, and I could hear the way her voice tightened with defense. "Emily, you're kind of too close to the situation. You're emotional. I've got the head for the financial stuff. Dad knows that." I couldn't breathe. "You don't even call him." "I do call. Once a month, Chloe. You call once a month and send him whiskey or a weighted blanket, and suddenly that makes you the heir." Another pause. Then she said it. The sentence that burned into my memory like acid. "Look, Em, just because you chose to throw your life away doesn't mean the rest of us have to feel guilty about it." My hand clenched the phone so tight I thought I might snap it. "You're unbelievable," I whispered. "I'm realistic, and honestly, if you'd made better choices, maybe you wouldn't be where you are." Click. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. My hands were shaking. I stood in the middle of my room, fists clenched, body trembling, not from sadness, not anymore, but rage. For the first time in years, I wanted to burn it all down, but not with fire, with clarity, because now I was done pretending, I was done hoping, I was done sacrificing my soul for people who treated me like a shadow. The woman in the mirror? She was coming back, and this time, she was bringing the truth with her. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and resignation. Dad was up early, fumbling with the toaster, squinting at the knobs like they were military-grade weaponry. He didn't see me walk in, didn't hear the quiet rage vibrating through my bones. "Emily," he muttered without turning around. "This toaster's defective, piece of junk." I leaned against the doorway, watching him yank the cord from the wall and shove the burnt slices into the trash with unnecessary force. The same toaster Matt and I got as a wedding gift. The one that used to make our mornings feel like something sacred. Now it was just another casualty in a war that never ended. "Want me to make you eggs instead?" I asked quietly. He finally looked at me. "No, I'm not helpless." And just like that, the bitterness returned. It always did. It filled the spaces where love used to live. I nodded, swallowing every scream in my throat, and turned toward the coffee machine. I moved slowly, methodically, like someone handling a bomb that might go off at any second. We sat in silence for a while. Him sipping the watery coffee I hadn't filtered right. Me staring into my mug like it held answers to questions I hadn't dared ask. Like why he never once said thank you. Like why he looked at me with pity instead of pride. Like why she got the house. "Chloe called yesterday," he said suddenly, cutting the silence like a scalpel. "She's planning a trip to see me." I didn't respond. "She says she wants to help me move back to East Ridge. She thinks being near the old house might be good for me. Familiar, you know." I nodded slowly. "That's nice," I said, my voice hollow. "She's practical. Always has been. Smart with money, too. You could learn a thing or two." That was it. That was the moment the leash broke. I turned to him, holding the mug like a shield. "I did learn, Dad. I learned how to bathe you when you forgot how to lift your arms. I learned how to guide you through a flashback without losing my mind. I learned how to clean blood off tile because you shattered a picture frame and didn't even remember doing it." He blinked. "You don't get to tell me what I could have learned." I wasn't yelling. I wasn't shaking. I was done. He stared at me, his lips pressed together, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "You've always been dramatic, Emily." I laughed, but it wasn't real. It was the kind of laugh that hides an implosion. "I gave up my family for you." His jaw tensed. "I didn't ask you to." There it was, that cruel little sentence that erases years of sacrifice in one breath. "You didn't have to," I whispered. "You were drowning, and I jumped in after you, and instead of pulling me up, you pushed me down." He said nothing, and in his silence, I heard everything. I stood up, left the coffee untouched, and walked out. Because if I stayed a second longer, I'd collapse, and I was done collapsing. I called Jackson's school and told them I was coming to have lunch with him. I didn't ask. I didn't schedule it. I just needed to breathe in something that still felt good, something real. When I arrived, Jackson's face lit up like a sunrise. "Mom!" he shouted, running into my arms. I hadn't held him like that in months. We sat in the corner of the cafeteria with our brown paper bags. He had peanut butter and jelly. I had nothing. I'd forgotten to pack one for myself. "Did you forget again?" he asked, pointing to my empty hands. I smiled and stole one of his carrot sticks. "Guess I'll just have to mooch off you," he giggled. It was the sound I'd been starving for. We talked about dinosaurs, art class, and a book he was reading about a dragon who had no fire but still managed to save a village. I don't know why, but that made my chest ache. When lunch ended and he hugged me goodbye, I felt something shift, something small, but something real. I didn't want to go home, so I drove. I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour until I found myself on a road I hadn't taken in years. And then I saw it, the house in East Ridge, Dad's old place, the house, the one Chloe would inherit, the one that held my childhood birthdays, Mom's homemade cinnamon rolls, and Sunday morning cartoons in footy pajamas. The one I vacuumed after Mom left because Dad didn't notice the dust piling up. The one I mowed in 95-degree heat while Chloe claimed her allergies would act up. I parked across the street and just sat there, staring at the front porch. The paint was chipping, the swing was gone. The flowers Mom once loved were now weeds. It didn't feel like a legacy. It felt like a lie. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found it. Kimberly Rivas, elder care caseworker. I hadn't called her in months, but I dialed, and when she answered, I didn't hesitate. "Kim, it's Emily Graves. I think I need to talk about placement options for my father." She didn't gasp. She didn't judge. She simply said, "I've been waiting for you to say that for 2 years." Tears sprang to my eyes. "Can we meet tomorrow?" "I'll be there," she promised. When I hung up, I stared back at the house one last time, not with longing, not with sadness, with detachment. The past didn't own me anymore, not that house, not Chloe, not even him. That night, I slept in Jackson's room beside him on the floor. He reached out in his sleep and touched my hand, murmuring something about a fireless dragon. And I thought, maybe you don't need fire to win. Maybe all you need is the strength to walk away from a battlefield you were never meant to die on. The next morning came with fog. Not just outside, though the yard was wrapped in mist, but in my body. My limbs moved like they weighed 100 pounds each. My chest ached as though my ribs were holding in something far heavier than lungs. But I got up. I made breakfast for Jackson. Real breakfast. Pancakes with strawberries, the way he liked them. And I made coffee, strong and hot, not that bitter swamp water Dad always complained about. Jackson blinked at me from across the table. "You okay?" he asked through a mouthful of syrup. "I think so," I said. He looked relieved, and that broke my heart a little, that a child had learned to monitor my moods like a weather report, that his sense of safety depended on whether or not his mom could breathe that day. After he left for school, I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the door to Dad's room. I could hear the rustle of newspapers, the faint clink of his spoon in the cereal bowl. A normal morning, as if nothing had cracked open the universe just 2 nights ago, as if he hadn't betrayed me without blinking. I didn't knock. I didn't enter. I just turned away. Because today wasn't about keeping everything together. Today was about starting over. At 10:30 sharp, Kimberly arrived. She was shorter than I remembered. Her red coat was dusted with ash-colored lint, her boots tracked in dried leaves. But her smile was warm, grounded, like the kind of person who'd seen fire and knew how to walk through it without burning. We sat in the living room. Dad had gone out to the porch for his daily newspaper and grumbling ritual. I prayed he wouldn't come in just yet. "So," Kimberly said, flipping open her folder, "you're ready to explore options?" I nodded. She tilted her head gently. That's not easy to say. No, I whispered. It's not. She handed me a list. Facilities, resources, home health assistance, assisted living communities specifically designed for veterans with PTSD. Some local, some not. Do I have to tell him right away? I asked. Kimberly smiled, but it was tinged with sorrow. You don't have to do anything today. But once we start applications, it's best to have him involved early on. It helps with transition, less shock. Shock. If only she knew how many shocks my father had survived and inflicted. I stared at the page, my eyes scanning names and brochures, glossy pictures of smiling seniors with therapy dogs and manicured lawns. None of it felt real. Until I saw one. Arbor Hollow Retreat, small, quiet, 30 minutes from Jackson's school, specialized PTSD team, veteran-led support groups, and an art program. My fingers lingered on that line. He used to paint, I murmured. Kimberly leaned in. Then maybe this is where his healing starts. I nodded, though my throat was thick. Because healing? For him? That felt like a word meant for someone else. But maybe it was meant for me too. We outlined a plan. Kim would submit paperwork. I'd gather documents, start preparing the house for eventual transition. She touched my hand as she left. You're not failing him, Emily. You're just choosing to live. I watched her car disappear down the street, and then I turned around and walked straight into him. Dad stood on the porch steps, arms crossed, his face unreadable. How long have you been standing there? I asked. Long enough, he said. There was silence. I see, he added. You're kicking me out. No, I said, too tired to explain. I'm trying to save what's left of both of us. He scoffed. From what? I'm not dead. I'm not some fragile old man who needs to be shoved into a home and forgotten. That's not what this is. No? His voice rose. Then what is it? Because it looks like my daughter's throwing me away to clear her conscience. I stepped back, not physically, but inside, because that hurt, even after everything. I've given you everything I had, I whispered. I've been here through every breakdown, every nightmare, every shattered thing. I gave up my marriage, Dad. I gave up Jackson's peace. And you rewarded me by giving your legacy to Chloe. His face didn't change. You think I don't know how hard it's been? He said. You think I wanted you to suffer? No, I said. I think you stopped seeing me as your daughter a long time ago. The words hung between us like fog, thick, impenetrable, suffocating. He didn't respond. He just turned and walked back inside, his shoulders hunched. That night, I packed a small bag of his things, not because I wanted him gone right away, but because I needed a boundary. For the first time in 3 years, I needed to choose me. I laid out the brochures, left them on his nightstand. No threats, no ultimatums, just choices. And the hope, tiny, flickering, that maybe somewhere inside him, the man who once loved me still existed. When I tucked Jackson in, he looked at me sleepily. Are we going to be okay? I stroked his hair. Yes, baby, I said. We're finally going to be okay. And I meant it. Because letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It just means you stop bleeding for people who don't see the wounds. 3 days passed. 3 long days filled with silence so thick I could hear the refrigerator hum like a freight train. Dad didn't mention the brochures, didn't ask about the caseworker, didn't even look in my direction unless absolutely necessary. But I noticed. I noticed how he hovered near his door when I was on the phone, how he paused outside Jackson's room when I read bedtime stories, how he sat longer at the kitchen table as if trying to memorize the angles of the house. He knew. He just wasn't ready to admit it. And maybe I wasn't either. Because for all my tough talk, all the clarity and boundaries, I still hoped he'd come around, that he'd walk into the living room, hold out the brochure for Arbor Hollow, and say, "Let's talk about this together, kiddo." But no such words came. Instead, on the fourth night, I found a stack of old letters shoved into the back of a kitchen drawer. I wasn't looking for them. I had opened the drawer to find a spare envelope, and there they were, tied with twine, yellowed at the edges. At first, I didn't recognize the handwriting, but then I saw the return address. Chloe, the golden daughter, the one who never had time to visit, but always had time to write flowery things from 1,000 miles away. I didn't want to read them, but something compelled me. Maybe I was looking for proof. Maybe I was searching for one line, one phrase that explained how she stole his loyalty without ever lifting a finger. The first letter began like a Hallmark card. "Dear Daddy, I hope the flowers I sent arrived okay. You deserve to be surrounded by beauty, even if Emily doesn't always understand that you need space to heal. I know she means well, but maybe too much well-meaning can become suffocating." I felt my stomach twist. The next letter was worse. "Emily tries so hard, but maybe that's the problem. She takes everything so personally. You need peace, not someone hovering over you 24/7. I wish I lived closer, but you know I'd give you space, not guilt." The words bled with fake compassion, pretty lies in cursive handwriting, manipulation dressed up as concern. And he believed it. He read these letters and believed that Chloe was the victim, that I was the burden. I don't remember when I started crying, but the tears came fast, hot, and full of rage. I clutched the letters in my fists, shaking. All those years, all those nights, and this was what he believed? I almost confronted him then, stormed into his room, threw the letters on his bed, and demanded answers. But I didn't, because what I needed wasn't a fight, it was freedom. That night, I wrote him a letter of my own, not for him to find, not for him to reply to, but because I had to say it, even if no one ever heard it. Dear Dad, I have spent the last 3 years loving a ghost of a father who used to believe in me, a man who once clapped the loudest at my spelling bee, who danced with me barefoot in the kitchen to old Motown records. I don't know where that man went. I don't know when he disappeared. But I stayed. I stayed when your nightmares got violent. I stayed when you didn't remember my birthday. I stayed when you called me names, when you told me I was weak, when you told me Chloe was the only one who understood. I didn't stay because I had nowhere else to go. I stayed because I believed love meant not giving up. But now I realize love should not cost me my peace. Love should not cost my son his safety. And love should never require me to disappear so someone else can feel whole. So I'm letting go, not with hate, not with revenge, just with truth. I will help you transition to a place where you can be cared for. And I will do so with dignity. But I will not stay here, fading. I will not continue bleeding for someone who doesn't see the cuts. Goodbye, Dad. Not forever, but for now. Emily. I folded the letter and tucked it into the drawer where I'd found Chloe's. I didn't plan on showing it to him. It was mine, a release, a final breath after years of drowning. But the universe has a way of interfering, because the next morning it was gone, and Dad's door was closed, locked. I stood in the hallway, my heart pounding. Had he read it? Would he come out swinging, metaphorically or otherwise? But he didn't say anything. Not that day. Not the next. He didn't mention the letter at all. But something had shifted. He didn't glare at me during breakfast. He didn't complain about the coffee. And on the third night, he placed the Arbor Hollow brochure on the kitchen table. Didn't say a word, just left it there like a peace offering. And suddenly my knees went weak, because I realized he had read the letter, and maybe, for the first time in years, he saw me, not as a nurse, not as a guilt trip, not as the one who stayed out of obligation, but as a daughter, a woman trying to reclaim her life. Later that night, as I tucked Jackson into bed, he asked, "Is Grandpa going away?" I hesitated. He might, but not far. Jackson nodded. "Will you be okay?" And for the first time in years, I answered honestly, "Yes, baby, I think I will." Because the moment you reclaim your voice is the moment you begin to rebuild your life. And that was the first stone in the foundation of mine. 2 weeks later, it was done. The paperwork was signed. The arrangements confirmed. Dad would move into Arbor Hollow on Monday morning. He didn't fight it, didn't lash out. In fact, he barely spoke. There was a strange quiet in the house, like the moment just before a storm, but not a violent one. A stillness so thick it made you second-guess if something terrible had even happened at all. I wasn't sure what he was thinking. Maybe he hated me. Maybe he finally understood. Or maybe, most likely, he had just accepted that this chapter of his life was over. But Chloe hadn't said a word. Until Thursday. That's when she called. I was making dinner, boiling pasta while Jackson colored at the kitchen table. His drawings had life again, color, smiling dragons, bright sun, grass beneath his feet. When the phone rang and her name lit up the screen, my stomach dropped. I answered. She didn't even say hello. "I heard Dad's moving into a facility." No preamble, just accusation. "Yes," I said calmly. "He is." She scoffed. "How dare you do that without including me?" I laughed. It slipped out before I could stop it. "Include you? Chloe, you've been checking in via greeting cards for 3 years. I'm still his daughter. You're the one who told me I was suffocating him, that I needed to back off. Well, congrats. I backed off, permanently." Silence. Then came the venom. "You always do this. Play the martyr. Pretend like you're the only one who cares. But you've never understood Dad, not like I do." I pressed the phone to my ear and walked into the hallway, where Jackson couldn't hear. "I found your letters, Chloe, the ones telling him I was too much, that I made him worse." There was a pause. Then, "You went through my things?" "They were in our house, in the kitchen drawer, Chloe. If you didn't want them found, maybe don't leave your poison where people eat." "You know what?" she snapped. "You're pathetic. You spent years playing nursemaid, and for what? He still trusts me more. Because you spoon-fed him the version of me that served your ego. Oh, please, you were never cut out for this. You're emotional, fragile. You fall apart over everything." I smiled slowly, because the old me might have swallowed that, but not now, not after what I'd rebuilt. "Say whatever you want, Chloe. Monday, he moves, and after that, you can visit him as much as you like. You're free to play savior now that the real work's done." "Don't act so smug," she hissed. "He's still giving me the house. I'm still the one in the will. And there it was, the twist of the knife. But this time, it didn't cut the way it used to. Enjoy your empty victory, I said, because houses don't hold legacy. People do. And I'm finally done bleeding for someone who didn't even ask me to stay. Then I hung up. My hands shook, but not from weakness, from the adrenaline of standing up for myself, for once not backing down. Later that night, while folding laundry, I heard Dad's door creak open. He stepped into the hallway, eyes tired, expression unreadable. "Did Chloe call?" he asked. I nodded. "She did." He hesitated, then said, "She's angry. She usually is when she doesn't get what she wants." There was a long pause. Then softly, "I read your letter." I looked up. His eyes weren't cold this time. They were haunted. "I don't remember a lot of things," he said, "but I remember the day you stayed." I held my breath. "You showed up with lasagna and a stack of VA forms. I was yelling at a lamp because I thought it was a landmine." "And you didn't flinch." "I was scared," I admitted, "but I loved you." He nodded slowly. "I know. I just didn't know how to love you back without hurting you." That hit deeper than I wanted it to. He looked down. "I let Chloe write the will. I didn't understand what I was signing. I just wanted her to stop saying I was losing my mind." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "She wrote it." I trusted her. She said it would take the stress off me, that you'd be fine, that you didn't care about things like houses and money. I stepped closer. "Dad, are you saying she manipulated you?" He didn't answer, but he didn't have to, because I could see it in his face. Regret, shame, and something else. Recognition. He finally saw what she'd done, what I had endured. The scales were falling off. "I want to fix it," he whispered. I nodded, voice steady. "Then let's fix it, together." He looked up at me. For the first time in a long time, he looked like my father. Not a soldier, not a ghost, just Dad. And maybe that wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. Dad didn't sleep that night. I could hear him pacing in his room, floorboards creaking in an uncertain rhythm, like the ticking of a clock trying to rewind itself. I didn't sleep either. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding from the weight of what he'd said. "I want to fix it." 4 words I never thought I'd hear from him. 4 words I had begged for in silence for 3 years. And yet they didn't bring relief. They brought questions. Why now? Why not before the bruises, the lost birthdays, the broken marriage? Was this guilt or redemption? Part of me didn't care. Part of me just needed this last act of truth before I could let go, before I could finally release the bitterness I'd wrapped myself in like armor. At 7:42 a.m. the next morning, Dad stood in the kitchen with a paper in his hands. "I found the notary's number," he said. I blinked. "What?" "She came with Chloe, last spring, to the house in East Ridge. I thought it was something for the VA, but it was the will." My hands tightened around my coffee mug. He continued, "She said we could change it if I signed a correction with 2 witnesses. My voice came out quiet. "Do you want to?" He nodded, eyes still on the paper. "I do, but not to give it to you." I froze. His next words came soft, but firm. "I want to give it to Jackson." The world tilted. My breath caught. "What?" "I've done damage I can't undo," he said. "But I can make sure your son has something, a foundation, a legacy that begins with truth, not manipulation." I stared at him, stunned. I don't know what to say. Just say you'll help me do it right. I nodded slowly, heart twisting in my chest. Dad had never been a man of poetic words. But this was his apology, his surrender. And maybe, just maybe, it was his healing too. We made the call that afternoon. The new notary would come to our house Friday evening. 2 witnesses were arranged, Kimberly from Arbor Hollow and our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Walker, who had once helped me carry groceries when I nearly collapsed from exhaustion. Everything was in place until Chloe showed up. It was Thursday night. The doorbell rang at 9:12 p.m. I was brushing my teeth. Dad was asleep. Jackson was curled up with a book about astronauts and gummy bears. I opened the door and froze. Chloe stood there in heels far too high for our cracked porch and a blazer that screamed lawyer's girlfriend more than loving daughter. "Nice to see you've remembered where we live," I said flatly. She didn't flinch. "I want to talk to Dad. He's asleep. I don't care." She pushed past me like she still had claim over every hallway she'd abandoned. Her perfume hit me like a slap, expensive, artificial, suffocating. "Chloe, I know what you're doing," she snapped, turning on me in the living room. "You're manipulating him. He's old, confused, and you're trying to steal what's mine." I stared at her. "Yours?" "Yes. The house, the account, the military benefits, all of it. You don't care about him. You just care that he gave it to me instead of you." Something inside me broke open, but not the way it used to. Not with hurt, with clarity. I stepped closer. "You want the truth, Chloe? I didn't stay for the money. I stayed when he peed himself on the couch and begged for a gun. I stayed when he screamed at Jackson in the middle of the night and didn't remember doing it the next morning. I stayed when I had $7 in my account and 2 broken ribs from a fall caused by cleaning up one of his episodes." Her lips parted, but I wasn't done. "You? You showed up with gift baskets and Instagram captions. You played the long game from the comfort of a city skyline while I played triage in a war zone." She blinked. "You think I'm doing this to win? I already lost. I lost everything, Chloe. My husband, my home, my time with my son. There is nothing you can take from me now that hasn't already been stolen." Chloe's voice came out tight. "He doesn't know what he's doing." "He knows exactly what he's doing. And for the first time in years, he's doing it for the right reasons." There was silence between us, until she whispered, "You don't deserve this." "No," I said, "but Jackson does." That's when I saw it. The crack in her mask, the flicker of fear. Because deep down she knew, if this new will was signed, her leverage was gone. Her illusion of power shattered. She turned on her heel and stormed out, didn't slam the door, didn't look back, just left. And I didn't follow, because some exits are better left silent. The next day, Dad was calm. He put on the button-down shirt I hadn't seen in years, the blue one Mom used to iron before their date nights. He shaved. He even smiled at Jackson during breakfast. When the notary arrived, he was ready. The witnesses signed, the papers were sealed, and just like that, the story changed. Not because someone begged, not because someone guilted, but because truth finally had the pen. Later that evening, I sat on the porch, staring up at the stars, my heart still catching up with the moment. Dad stepped outside, sat beside me, said nothing for a long time. Then, "You're stronger than I ever was." I looked at him. "You just forgot how strong you used to be." He didn't argue. He just nodded. And for once, that was enough. The sun rose slowly that Monday morning, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. This was the day. Dad would move into Arbor Hollow by 11:00 a.m. Everything had been packed in silence. His old medals, some framed photographs, a stack of books he barely read but refused to part with, and his worn leather jacket, the one he hadn't worn in years but kept near like a memory he couldn't give up. I had expected him to be nervous, but he wasn't. He was calm, even peaceful. "I don't deserve this grace," he said, as I helped him fold one last blanket into his duffel bag. "We don't get grace because we earn it," I replied. "We get it because someone still believes we can be more." He looked at me for a long time. No words, just eyes that finally saw. At 10:15 a.m., the van from Arbor Hollow pulled up. Kimberly stepped out, clipboard in hand, her smile soft and reassuring. She greeted Dad like an old friend. He returned her nod with something close to a salute. But we weren't alone. Because standing at the edge of our driveway, dressed in black like she was attending a funeral, was Chloe, and she brought a lawyer. I felt the chill before I even registered their faces. Chloe crossed the lawn like she owned it, high heels sinking into the grass with each furious step. "We need to talk," she snapped. "Now." Dad glanced at me, then turned back to her. "If this is about the will—" "It is about the will," she cut in, "because I spoke with my attorney, and the original document was legally executed and notarized. You don't get to just change it because Emily put you up to something while you're clearly not in the right mental state." I stepped forward. "You need to leave." Her lawyer, an overly tanned man with slicked hair and a crocodile grin, lifted a hand. "Ma'am, if I may—" "No, you may not," I snapped. "You're trespassing, and we have a legal update signed and witnessed last Friday. You have no right to be here." Dad surprised us all by clearing his throat. "She's not wrong," he said to the lawyer. "I made a new will, with full capacity, with witnesses. I asked questions. I understood what I was doing." Chloe's face twisted. "You can't do this to me, after everything I've done for you." Dad turned to her, expression blank. "You wrote me off the moment I needed you." Chloe took a step forward. "You're confused. Emily's been manipulating you. She wants everything. She always has." "Emily," he said quietly, "was the only one who stayed." And that was the moment everything shifted. Her lawyer looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, if you'd like to contest—" "No," Dad said. "We're done here." Chloe stared at him, her face hardening like wet clay drying too fast. "I hope you choke on your regrets," she spat, and then she left. No parting hug, no final tear, just the sound of tires crunching over gravel as she peeled out of the driveway. I stood frozen, not because I was afraid, but because for the first time, I wasn't. Dad exhaled, long and slow, and turned to me. "You okay?" he asked. It took me a second to answer. "I think I finally am." The van door slid open, and Jackson poked his head out. "Grandpa, you forgot your jacket!" Dad smiled and took it from him, ruffling his hair. "Thanks, soldier." Jackson grinned. It was the first time I'd seen them exchange warmth in years. Kimberly helped Dad into the van. We didn't make a show of goodbyes, no dramatic hugs, just a quiet nod, and understanding. I watched the van disappear down the street, and I didn't cry. I just stood in the doorway of the house I had nearly died inside, feeling something I hadn't felt in a very long time, weightless. Later that evening, while sorting laundry, I found a small envelope tucked into the basket. My name was written on it in my father's handwriting. Inside was a single note. Emily, I don't know if I'll ever be the father you deserve, but I want you to know. I remember the night you stayed. I remember the soup, the tremble in your hands, the silence you filled with love. I never said it, but I'll say it now. Thank you, not just for staying, but for finally knowing when to walk away. That took more strength than I ever had. You didn't lose me. You saved me. Dad. I sat on the floor with that note pressed to my heart, and I wept. Not because I was broken anymore, but because I was finally whole. I expected silence after that day. I expected Chloe to retreat into her polished world of staged brunches and curated smiles. I thought she'd simply fold herself into the arms of her lawyer boyfriend and rewrite history like she always did, framing herself as the misunderstood daughter whose father was taken from her by a jealous sister. But Chloe never goes down quietly. 2 days after Dad moved into Arbor Hollow, I got a call from the front desk. "She's here," Kimberly whispered over the phone. She showed up this morning with flowers and a laminated binder labeled Advanced Advocacy Documents. I'm assuming she's trying to stir things up. My stomach turned. What did Dad say? Kimberly paused. He said, "Put her on the visitor list, but only during office hours, and don't let her bring paperwork." I laughed, and then I cried, because for the first time, he was setting boundaries for me. Still, that didn't stop Chloe from trying. She visited 3 times that week. Each time, she brought a different version of herself. Monday, the concerned daughter with too much mascara and a cardigan 2 sizes too small, dripping with artificial warmth and casual digs like, "You look tired, Daddy. Emily must be keeping you up." Wednesday, the poised businesswoman strutting in with spreadsheets, trying to schedule legal reassessments and asking to speak with management behind closed doors. Friday, the daughter in tears. That version hurt the most, because for all the manipulation, for all the damage, there was a moment, a sliver, when I saw the real girl under the theatrics. The one who used to braid my hair and sing into hairbrushes with me in our shared bedroom. But I didn't step in. I let the boundaries hold, because I had learned something important. Not every tear deserves your rescue. Still, Chloe wasn't done. That Sunday morning, I opened my email and nearly choked on my coffee. Subject: "You want a war? Fine." Her message was venom with punctuation. "I hope you're happy. You poisoned him against me. You always were jealous of the way he trusted me. But don't get comfortable, Em. I've contacted a new attorney. We're not done. If you think this new will is bulletproof, you're wrong. And when I win, don't come crawling back, begging for mercy." I stared at the screen, not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't. Not anymore. Not after everything I'd survived. She could send her lawyers. She could file her claims. But what she couldn't undo was truth. And that truth had been signed, witnessed, and sealed in ink. Still, a part of me grieved. Not for the house, not for the money, but for the sister I had lost long before the first punch of betrayal landed. Chloe and I were never close. Not really. Our childhood was a balancing act between competition and coexistence. But somewhere in the middle, we'd had moments, whispered secrets, inside jokes, shared dreams. And now? Now we were strangers bound only by blood and a last name that meant very different things to each of us. I closed the laptop and walked outside. The yard needed raking. Jackson's bike was tipped on its side, halfway buried in leaves. A squirrel darted across the fence like it had somewhere better to be. I took a deep breath. This was my world now. Unfiltered, imperfect, mine. The next day, I drove to Arbor Hollow just before lunch. Dad was in the common room, watching two residents play chess and nursing a half-empty cup of ginger tea. He looked up when I entered and smiled. "You cut your hair," he said. I touched the ends, still getting used to how light my head felt. "Yeah, figured it was time." He nodded. "Looks good." I sat beside him. "How are you?" I asked. He shrugged. "They have me doing art therapy. I drew a duck yesterday. Looked more like a potato with a beak, but hey, no one laughed." I smiled. "And Chloe?" He didn't flinch. "She cried last time." I heard. "She wanted me to change it back, said I was confused." I looked at him carefully. "Were you?" He stared at the chessboard. "Not about this." I let that sit for a while. Then slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and folded. He handed it to me. I unfolded the paper. It was my letter. The one I wrote weeks ago. The one he wasn't supposed to read. "I keep it with me," he said. I couldn't speak. My throat closed around the words like a fist. He glanced at me. "I don't always know how to say the right things, but I know what's real now. And you were real." I nodded, wiping my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. "No," he said, voice thick. "Thank you." He didn't hug me. He wasn't the hugging kind, but he reached over and gently tapped my wrist. 3 times. A silent code we used as kids. "I love you." 3 taps. And this time, I tapped back. 3 more. "I love you too." The first sign that Chloe's empire was cracking came from a place I never expected. Her employer. I wasn't looking for it. I hadn't searched her name or tracked her social media since the email war she launched. But one morning, while scrolling for freelance illustration jobs, an article caught my eye. "Marketing exec suspended after mishandling eldercare dispute caught on audio." I froze. I clicked. And there she was. Chloe Graves, in full color, her face slightly blurred but unmistakable. The article described an anonymous tip, a recorded conversation between her and our father at Arbor Hollow. Apparently, during one of her visits, she'd spoken loud enough in the hallway for someone to hear her through a cracked door. Words like manipulated, mental incompetence, and "he owes me everything" had made their way onto the audio file. A staff member had submitted it to their board after Chloe aggressively tried to push through legal documents she had no business carrying. The facility flagged it. Her employer heard it. And suddenly, the golden girl of digital marketing was put on leave pending investigation. My heart didn't leap. There was no wicked thrill of victory, just a hollow thud. This wasn't a win. This was a mess. Later that day, I got a text from an unknown number. "You got what you wanted. You broke me. You always hated that I shined brighter." I stared at the screen. I didn't reply, because that wasn't a conversation. It was a performance. One last act of deflection. And I wasn't the audience anymore. The irony was, she wasn't broken by me. She was broken by her own illusion that charm could replace compassion. That surface was stronger than substance, that she could fake her way into legacy without ever showing up when it mattered. I visited Dad the next morning with Jackson. It was the first time Jackson felt brave enough to come with me since the move. He clutched his backpack tightly as we walked the quiet halls of Arbor Hollow, eyes darting between walls lined with paintings, memory quilts, and photos of veteran reunions. When we reached the community room, Dad was in a circle of chairs, telling a story to a group of men who looked both weathered and wide-eyed. And then the Humvee just stopped, like God himself pulled the brake. They laughed, not politely, but with recognition. And when he saw Jackson, his face lit up. "There he is," Dad called out. "My best little artist." Jackson hesitated, then smiled. Dad beckoned him over and pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Show her." Jackson opened it slowly. It was a drawing of a man in a wheelchair holding hands with a boy. The sun was shining, the grass was green, and above them was a caption written in messy crayon letters: "Even broken soldiers still protect. Love, Jackson." My chest tightened. Dad reached over and tapped Jackson's hand. "Thank you, son. That's the bravest thing anyone's ever drawn." Jackson beamed, and in that moment, I realized something I never expected to feel again. Peace, the kind that doesn't come with loud triumphs or court victories, the kind that grows in quiet spaces, in healing homes, in unspoken forgiveness, in the return of trust. That afternoon, while Dad napped, I sat with Kimberly in the sunroom, watching the wind bend the trees outside. "She hasn't come back," she said softly. "Chloe?" She nodded. "No calls, no visits, no emails." I shrugged. She got what she needed, or she didn't. "She left a binder behind." My eyebrows lifted. Kimberly pulled it out from under a stack of administrative files and handed it to me. The cover read, "End of Life Legal Control, Chloe Graves, Primary Executor." I flipped through it. Dozens of printouts, drafts, affidavits, typed up emails she'd never sent, claims of Dad's incapacity, requests for medical overrides, a master class in control by paperwork. I closed the binder and placed it on my lap. "Burn it," I said flatly. Kimberly blinked. "Seriously, burn it, shred it, scatter the ashes over a cliff for all I care." She laughed. "Consider it done." As I left that day, I looked back one last time at the building. The bricks, the glass, the small miracles inside, and I whispered a prayer, not for vengeance, not even for justice, but for release, that Chloe would find her way back to whatever piece of humanity she'd buried, and that I would never again carry what wasn't mine. Weeks passed. The autumn leaves surrendered themselves to the ground, blanketing the earth in shades of rust and gold. The wind picked up, softer now, like even the weather was exhaling after a long, bitter season. Life didn't transform overnight, but it shifted, quietly, slowly, permanently. Dad had his routine now. Morning walks with staff, afternoon chess, weekly art therapy, and the occasional call where he'd ramble about veteran poker night and the fact that he was surprisingly good at watercolor. I visited once or twice a week, no longer as a caregiver, just as a daughter. And that was enough. One Saturday, Jackson and I brought a thermos of hot cocoa and a homemade apple pie to share with Dad in the Arbor Hollow courtyard. The trees overhead were mostly bare now, casting skeletal shadows that danced across the benches and brick paths. "Grandpa's in his room," the nurse said. He's been going through a box of old things today, said he needed to sort some memories. I smiled. Sounds like a good project. Jackson raced ahead to knock on the door. Grandpa, we brought pie. Inside, the room was lit by sunlight catching the dust in the air. On the bed was a box filled with photos, old letters, medals, and, tucked at the very bottom, a photograph I hadn't seen in decades. It was us, our family, before. Mom, Dad, Chloe, and me. All smiling in front of the old East Ridge house, holding sparklers one 4th of July. Chloe had a flag painted on her cheek. I was missing a front tooth. And Dad, he looked happy, not proud, not hardened, just there, present, alive. He held the photo in his hands like it might break. I thought I lost this, he said. I sat beside him. We look like we belonged to each other, I said quietly. We did, he replied. We just didn't know how to hold on. I glanced over at him. What happened, Dad? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pointed to himself in the photo. That man right there, he came home with more ghosts than he could carry, and he dropped them on everyone else without even realizing it. He turned the picture over. Nothing written on the back, no date, no names, just silence. Then he said, I didn't lose track of my daughters because I stopped loving them. I lost track because I forgot how to see them. I felt my throat tighten. Do you see us now? I asked. He looked at me. Yes, I see you, Emily. I see the woman who held the line when no one else could, and I see the one who loved me enough to walk away when staying meant losing herself. I nodded, unable to speak. Jackson was crouched on the floor, drawing something in his notebook. I leaned over. He was sketching the photo we'd found. But in his version, there were more details: a bird on the fence, a dog we never had, and 4 golden halos above each head. Even Chloe's. Why the halos? I asked gently. He shrugged. Because it was a good moment, and good people can still mess up later. I stared at my son, and I knew. He was already wiser than I'd been at his age. When we left that day, Dad handed me the photo. Keep it, he said. It doesn't belong to the past anymore. I framed it and put it in Jackson's room. Not because I wanted to remember what we'd been, but because it reminded me that even the most broken stories still had a beginning filled with hope. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address, but I knew who it was from. Chloe. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Emily, I'm not writing for forgiveness. I wouldn't know how to ask. I'm sorry for what I did, not just with Dad, but with you. I wanted to be the one who fixed everything. I didn't know how to stay, so I tried to win. And I lost. I don't expect anything from you. I just needed to say it. I hope you're okay. They handed me the keys in an envelope that smelled like old oak and metal. The day the deed transferred, I didn't cry. Not because it wasn't overwhelming, but because I had already shed the tears that mattered. It wasn't about the property. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about legacy anymore. It was about finally standing in a space that had once been a symbol of betrayal and realizing that it no longer had the power to define me. The East Ridge house was quiet when I stepped inside. Dust hung in sunbeams like faint memories. The air held a smell I recognized instantly: aged wood, faint lemon oil, and the ghost of my childhood. I walked through slowly, fingers brushing along the banister, the door frame where Dad used to measure our height with a pencil. My faded initials were still there. So were Chloe's, though hers were neater. I stood in what used to be our shared room, 2 twin beds, one poster of a boy band, one of a galaxy far, far away, different planets, even then. I had the money now to renovate it, to repaint, to gut the kitchen and add modern appliances. People told me I should flip it, rent it, maybe even sell it and take the profit. But I didn't want to. I wanted to leave it just the way it was, for a little while longer, not as a monument to pain, but as proof that I had lived through something and come out the other side. That night, I took Jackson back there. He was quiet when he entered. He didn't remember much, but the echoes were there. "This is where you grew up?" he asked wide-eyed. I nodded. "And where I learned who not to be." We sat on the floor in the living room, eating takeout from a Thai place down the road, our drinks sweating onto paper napkins, the sounds of crickets filtering through the open windows. "I think I like this place," Jackson said, leaning against my shoulder. "Yeah?" "Yeah. It feels like a memory I forgot I had." I kissed the top of his head and wrapped my arm around him. "Maybe we'll come here sometimes," I said softly. "Not to live, just to remember." "Can I paint the walls?" "Only if you help me paint over your mistakes later," he giggled. That laugh, that carefree sound, it was the only thing I wanted to echo off those walls now. Later, when he had fallen asleep in a sleeping bag on the old carpet, I stepped outside. The stars were brighter in East Ridge, or maybe I could just finally see them. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A voicemail from Dad. "Hey, kiddo. Just wanted to say the group art project's coming along. I painted a lake today. I made it too blue, though. Kimberly says it looks like a swimming pool in heaven. Anyway, I miss you. Tell Jackson he's got the touch when it comes to color. Hope the house feels lighter these days. I know it's in better hands. Love you." I closed my eyes and let the tears fall, not heavy, not desperate, just soft, like a benediction, because everything he said, he meant, and for once, I wasn't longing for a different version of him. I was grateful for the version that remained. The next morning we packed up our sleeping bags and drove home. Our real home, the small one near Jackson's school, with mismatched curtains and a fridge covered in his art. I didn't need a mansion. I didn't need an apology written in stone. I just needed peace. And peace didn't arrive like a trumpet blast. It arrived quietly, like breath returning to a collapsed lung, like a whisper that said, "You're free now." I read it twice, then placed it in the same drawer where my own letter had once lived, not for safekeeping, but for closure. Because sometimes healing doesn't come with hugs or reunions or Instagram apologies. Sometimes it's just a few honest lines written too late, but still enough to lay a ghost to rest. They handed me the keys in an envelope that smelled like old oak and metal. The day the deed transferred, I didn't cry. Not because it wasn't overwhelming, but because I had already shed the tears that mattered. It wasn't about the property. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about legacy anymore. It was about finally standing in a space that had once been a symbol of betrayal and realizing that it no longer had the power to define me. The East Ridge house was quiet when I stepped inside. Dust hung in sunbeams like faint memories. The air held a smell I recognized instantly: aged wood, faint lemon oil, and the ghost of my childhood. I walked through slowly, fingers brushing along the banister, the doorframe where Dad used to measure our height with a pencil. My faded initials were still there. So were Chloe's, though hers were neater. I stood in what used to be our shared room, 2 twin beds, one poster of a boy band, one of a galaxy far, far away. different planets, even then. I had the money now to renovate it, to repaint, to gut the kitchen and add modern appliances. People told me I should flip it, rent it, maybe even sell it and take the profit. But I didn't want to. I wanted to leave it just the way it was, for a little while longer. Not as a monument to pain, but as proof. Proof that I had lived through something and come out the other side. That night, I took Jackson back there. He was quiet when he entered. He didn't remember much, but the echoes were there. "This is where you grew up?" he asked, wide-eyed. I nodded. "And where I learned who not to be." We sat on the floor in the living room, eating takeout from a Thai place down the road, our drinks sweating onto paper napkins, the sounds of crickets filtering through the open windows. "I think I like this place," Jackson said, leaning against my shoulder. "Yeah? Yeah. It feels like a memory I forgot I had." I kissed the top of his head and wrapped my arm around him. "Maybe we'll come here sometimes," I said softly. "Not to live, just to remember." "Can I paint the walls?" "Only if you help me paint over your mistakes later." He giggled. That laugh, that carefree sound, it was the only thing I wanted to echo off those walls now. Later, when he had fallen asleep in a sleeping bag on the old carpet, I stepped outside. The stars were brighter in East Ridge, or maybe I could just finally see them. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A voicemail from Dad. "Hey, kiddo. Just wanted to say the group art project's coming along. I painted a lake today. I made it too blue, though. Kimberly says it looks like a swimming pool in heaven. Anyway, I miss you. Tell Jackson he's got the touch when it comes to color. Hope the house feels lighter these days. I know it's in better hands. Love you." I closed my eyes and let the tears fall, not heavy, not desperate, just soft, like a benediction, because everything he said, he meant. And for once, I wasn't longing for a different version of him. I was grateful for the version that remained. The next morning, we packed up our sleeping bags and drove home. Our real home. The small one near Jackson's school, with mismatched curtains and a fridge covered in his art. I didn't need a mansion. I didn't need an apology written in stone. I just needed peace. And peace didn't arrive like a trumpet blast. It arrived quietly, like breath returning to a collapsed lung, like a whisper that said, "You're free now." A month later, the envelope came, thick, cream-colored, with gold foil lettering. "You are cordially invited to the Arbor Hollow Veterans Annual Art Gala." I almost laughed. Dad? At an art gala? The man who once rolled his eyes at Jackson's macaroni crafts? But here it was, and not just an invitation. A note was paperclipped to the front. "Emily, they picked my lake painting. You know, the Heaven Pool one. You better show up and bring the kid. They're letting me say a few words. I don't want to say the wrong ones. Help me remember the right ones." Dad. So we went. Jackson wore his best button-down, the one he called his thinking shirt. I wore a navy dress I hadn't worn in years, the one I used to think made me look too strong. Now I wore it like armor, but not to protect myself, just to reflect who I'd become. Arbor Hollow was buzzing with soft music, warm lights, and the scent of fresh-baked cookies. The walls of the atrium were lined with art, paintings, sketches, mixed media, all from the hands of those who had seen too much, lost too much, but still found the courage to create. Dad stood near the end of the row, next to a canvas that made me stop breathing. It was his lake. Not a real lake. Not even one I recognized. But I knew what it was. A place imagined. A place remembered. A place where sky bled into water, where trees bent gently into the wind and where the ripples looked like peace. Not victory, not power, just peace. He smiled as we approached. "You wore the armor dress," he joked. "You wore pants without holes," I replied. We both laughed. Jackson ran up and immediately pointed at the painting. "You made that?" "Guilty." "Looks like the place from my dream," Jackson said. Dad blinked. "What dream?" Jackson shrugged. "The one where you and Mom are in a canoe and I'm on the dock drawing you. You're not yelling, you're just floating." Dad's face crumpled a little, in a good way. "They should have picked you for the gala," he whispered. When the announcement came, he stepped up to the mic. His hands trembled a bit. His voice cracked once, but he spoke, and what he said will live in my chest for the rest of my life. "I used to think legacies were built in wars, in medals, in battles won. But the truth is, they're built in kitchens and bedtime stories and the quiet choice to stay when everything screams at you to leave. My daughter stayed. She saw the ugliest parts of me and stayed. And when she couldn't anymore, she did the bravest thing of all. She let go. This painting is for her. It's for the lake I never found in life, but that she helped me reach in my mind, and for my grandson, who reminded me that even broken things can still be beautiful when someone believes in them enough to draw them anyway." The room went quiet. Then came the applause, not thunderous, not explosive, but full of something deeper than noise, respect. Later that night, we walked outside beneath the stars. Jackson skipped ahead, pretending to be a spy. I walked beside Dad, and then he said it. "Thank you for not becoming her." It caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "You could have turned bitter, vengeful, the way Chloe did. You had every right, but you didn't." I paused. "I came close." "I know. But you didn't." We stopped at the edge of the parking lot, the building glowing behind us like a lighthouse on land. "You gave me more than forgiveness," he said. "You gave me another chance to become someone who deserved it." I nodded, throat tight. "I didn't do it for you," I whispered. "I know," he said, "and that's why it worked." We hugged, not a long, dramatic hug, just enough. Enough to say, "We're okay now." A week later, a new drawing went up on the fridge at home. It was Jackson's, crayon, as always. This time, it showed a house with light spilling from every window. Inside were 3 stick figures, one tall with a beard, one medium with long hair, and one tiny with a huge smile. Above it, in red marker, "We're not broken anymore. Love, J." And in that moment, I didn't need an inheritance. I didn't need validation. I didn't need Chloe to apologize, because I had everything I had ever needed. A house that held no power over me, a son who saw truth in color, and a father who finally learned how to love with open hands. And now, the house is quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that used to scream of abandonment or grief. It's the stillness of peace, the kind of silence that means nothing is missing anymore. Because sometimes redemption doesn't look like apologies. It looks like distance, like a crayon drawing on a fridge, like 3 words whispered in a hallway. "I see you." And after everything I lost, I finally gained the one thing I thought I never would, myself. Has someone in your life ever made you feel invisible, only for life to turn the tables in a way you never expected? If this story touched something deep inside you, leave a comment below and tell us your turning point. Hit the like button if you believe healing sometimes comes after walking away. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of quiet triumph, bittersweet justice, and the kind of endings that finally feel right. Your story matters, and maybe today's the day you reclaim it.